Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our panel today to Palestinian politics after the ceasefire. This is the second of a two sort of series program. On Monday, my colleague Dan Kurtzer moderated a panel on Israeli politics after the ceasefire, and today we're dealing with Palestinian politics after the ceasefire. About 31,000 Palestinians are now dead in Gaza, and the numbers are still climbing. And many international organizations report that Gazans are on the verge of hunger and starvation. Israeli hostages have yet to be released. Ceasefire is still being negotiated, and international humanitarian groups are struggling to get much needed aid into Gaza. Against this backdrop, we are here to discuss Palestinian politics after the ceasefire. Will the Palestinian Authority take charge of ruling Gaza? With Hamas being still viable, will this pit the Palestinian Authority against Hamas? Already it appears that tensions are growing between the two factions, with PA leaders blaming Hamas for a catastrophe that is even worse than the Nakba just a few days ago. And on top of all of this, Palestinians now have a new prime minister, Mohammed Mustafa. And the New York Times headline from 5 days ago reads, "New Palestinian prime minister offers little hope for change." Trying to process all of this, I am very delighted to be with our panelists today. My outstanding colleagues are joining us to give us much needed insight and expert opinion on the politics of Palestinian society today. With us is Dr. Khalil Shikaki, who is a professor of political science and director of the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research, based in Ramallah, Palestine. Khalil, it's very nice to have you with us. My colleague, Dr. Salam Fayyad, visiting senior scholar and the Daniella Coules 95 distinguished visitor in Foreign Affairs, School of Public and International Affairs, Princeton University, and the former Palestinian Prime Minister. Salam, thank you for joining us once again. And my colleague, Diana Greenwald, she's an assistant professor, Department of Political Science, the City College of New York, and she is an expert on Palestinian politics as well. So with this, let me start with the question that everybody is asking around Ramadan iftars this day. Salam, is there a ceasefire in sight? I think yes.
Well, thank you very much for convening this webinar. I'm delighted to be with my colleagues Khalil and Diana for this conversation. A lot has been said about trying to secure a ceasefire, however temporarily that may be or transitionally. And the latest model, as everybody knows, has been to try to secure a respite for a few weeks, 4 to 6 weeks. And the hope was to use the time that such a respite might provide in order to extend it and so on and so forth. That has stumbled badly, and based on what I heard today, and maybe, I just basically read the news. So Hamas is saying the ball is in Israel's court. Israel is saying the same. Israel is trying to really put additional pressure. There is the conversation with a lot of discord, at least publicly, on the question of Israel's intentions vis-a-vis Rafah. All the while, and you mentioned Ramadan, even without Ramadan and what really comes with it, the humanitarian situation of Gaza is absolutely terrible. You mentioned the death toll, number of Palestinians killed in this war of aggression. Not to mention the injured. We talk about like about 100,000 displaced and all, and in excess of 1 million cramped in the Rafah area. And so even if the number of fatalities, killings on the part of Palestinians by the Israeli army declined somewhat, it's still running at about 100 people, 100 lives perishing every day today. So the conversation cannot really proceed fast enough from my point of view. This war should have been stopped a long time ago. Shortly after it started, it had to stop, to be honest with you, because anyone who really knows anything about the situation did say, I think, and whoever didn't say would have said, that this was to no end relative to Israel's declared objectives of eradicating Hamas. It ended up being nothing but a war on Palestinians and civilians getting killed, children and all and behind every name there is a story. A lot of that is coming out. CNN ran something on this that is actually wrenching, and I recommend for people to really take a look at it 2 days ago. Names of children and all. So I don't know what is really taking, why is it taking so long to really actually, build on what appears to be a crack uh, between the United States and Israel to really actually make a final push for this war to stop. It's totally meaningless. Not to mention the tragedy that has been coming with it. So I've been saying this for a long period of time. As of late, I have not been doing much media, partly because I found myself repeating myself a lot, to be honest with you, because it just really keeps on. The war machine continues to go on, and you know, 100 people on at least are perishing every day, and this is just not something that I believe can be tolerated much longer. Ramadan, of course, comes with its own rituals and people, and really trying to really find something to eat, cooking grass if they really can get their hand on it. Images are just like unbelievable. So even before Ramadan, this should have been stopped, and I hope that there'll be an intensification of effort aimed at really bringing this war to an end sooner rather than later. But the latest I heard today was that while things have moved somewhat in the direction of stopping the war, at least in the form of respite, we're not there yet. So here we are. I hope more such effort can be made, and people will begin to move from the original narrative about what this war is about. I would like to also draw attention to your audience to a statement that was made recently, I think either yesterday or the day before yesterday, Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, saying something. You remember the story about Shifa Hospital? Shifa Hospital has been in the news again. The Israeli army is raiding it again. When it really all started, uh, Americans themselves said that their intelligence actually corroborates what the Israelis are saying about this being a fortress, this and that, the other thing. Senator Van Hollen of Maryland said 2 days ago, or yesterday even, he said something to the effect that we have seen the intelligence, our own intelligence, being US intelligence, and there is a disconnect between what we saw in our own intelligence and what the administration has been saying publicly. So how much longer does this have to really go on the basis of a narrative that from the very beginning was crying for some sanity and for some sense to really be brought into the conversation in order to bring about an end to this war of aggression sooner rather than later. I hope that can happen, but I just don't see anything. I haven't heard anything today that could suggest to me that this is imminent or around the corner. So we may be in for even more of this, and worse, of course, is the Israeli army intensifies, and I say intensifies because it didn't actually doing it, intensifies its operations in the Rafah area.
And thank you so much, Salam. And when you say there's a discrepancy between the U.S. intelligence and what we're hearing, you're talking about Hamas's capabilities as they stand today.
Yes, and in part I was making reference in particular to the story about why Shifa Hospital was targeted.
Yes.
And officials were at the time saying, actually a spokesman for the White House at the time saying, our own intelligence corroborates what the Israelis are saying about Shifa Hospital being a fortress, a command center, this, that, and the other thing. Well, now Senator from Maryland saying, actually having looked at U.S. own intelligence, he saw a disconnect between what the intelligence reporting was, U.S. own intelligence, and what the U.S. government was saying about this publicly. We have heard this story before. WMDs in the case of Iraq and all of that sort of thing. So I think it's really very important for there to be a realization sooner rather than later that this is really to no end relative to Israel's own objectives. The only thing that's happening is more Palestinians getting killed, and with it, the tragedy, the rift, and the much needed lifting of spirit, burying of the dead before anything else, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
Let that begin. Not to mention the humanitarian stuff, and there is a lot that can be said about that. But I think one of our colleagues, you said Diana is going to cover that, but we'll see how that goes, and if there is need, we'll come back to it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Salam. So Khalil, let me just turn to you. You've been conducting a lot of polling before October 7th and since October 7th. We know that along with with the Arab Barometer as well, and we know that support for the Palestinian Authority is probably at an all-time low. The government of Mahmoud Abbas does not enjoy much popularity. When people talk about a revitalized or reconfigured Palestinian Authority taking charge of Gaza, it raises a lot of questions. Number one is, does the PA, even with the new prime minister, will it have the credibility and legitimacy to sort of rule Gaza? What role will Hamas play if Hamas is not eradicated? And by all accounts, even by Israeli figures and numbers, Hamas is not doesn't seem even close to being eradicated right now. Will Hamas contest Palestinian Authority governance in Gaza? And does the Palestinian Authority, putting aside the question of legitimacy and trust of the people, does it have the capability, I should say, sort of military capability, if you may, to even govern Gaza?
Thank you, Amaney, and good to be with you, and with you, Salam, Diana. Well, first of all, we still don't have a new prime minister. We have a prime minister designate. The prime minister is still Shaya. The new prime minister is very much unknown to the public, but most importantly is not known as an independent an independent character who can be an independent prime minister, or even a politician who can manage the difficult political domestic issues. So it is not clear how he will be managing under the current most extreme conditions. For most Palestinians, the change is cosmetic. We actually just released, I've come to you from a press conference in which we have just released our most recent survey, and we asked about Mohammed Mustafa, the prime minister designate. He, as I said, is really not known to the public. Only 10% seems to think positively of him. So clearly, it's not somebody that the public will trust. Most of the Palestinians do not want a government appointed by the current Palestinian president. They want a government that comes out of joint dialogue between the various Palestinian factions, a national unity government. They do want a government of technocrats. This comes out loud and clear from our survey. They do not want a government made up of politicians or political parties, and they do not want a government to report to the president of the Palestinian Authority, who does not have much legitimacy. Our just released survey shows 93% of Palestinians in the West Bank want him to resign. And so he is damaging the ability of the Palestinian Authority to restore itself rather than help to revitalize it. Without a revitalized, in the sense that is one that is elected Palestinian Authority, or perhaps temporarily a national unity government of technocrats that is independent of the political parties and the president, Hamas is the only choice left for Gazans and West Bankers. And again, this comes out loud and clear in the current survey. Hamas's popularity has declined significantly since the last survey we have done after the war, which was released 3 months ago. Hamas's popularity has gone down, but those who say Hamas should control Gaza has gone up. In Gaza, Gazans have reduced their support to Hamas by 10 percentage points. How could that be interpreted? It is because they don't want the Palestinian Authority. We have not given them a better alternative. They would still prefer to stay with Hamas rather than have the current Palestinian leadership and the current Palestinian Authority. The new prime minister designate isn't going to convince many Palestinians that the current Palestinian Authority can be reformed without elections. and without consensus, internal consensus, and without creating a body that can be independent of the current Palestinian leadership, Gaza has absolutely no alternative but Hamas. And without thinking about these issues out loud right now and considering how we can put the Palestinians on track to elections and to have a new leadership, there is absolutely no way in which the current leadership will reform itself or lead the Palestinians towards a better leadership that can not just be in charge of Gaza and the day after, but provide services and governance to Palestinians in the West Bank. West Bankers are a lot more fed up and unhappy with the Palestinian leadership than Gazans. In fact, that also comes out loud and clear in the current survey. And therefore, the mere appointment of a person to become a new prime minister does not and will not convince many Palestinians that we are on track to changing anything in governance, in legitimacy, credibility of the Palestinian leadership. There is absolutely no doubt that we need to have elections, and that elections must be the most important Palestinian goal in the short term.
Thank you for that, Khalil. Diana, sort of moving to putting this question to you as well. You know, thinking about other sort of viable people on the Palestinian scene, we've heard a lot about Marwan Barghouti. He enjoys popularity in the polls. Would you like to say a word about why he still resonates widely, and if this is a viable alternative in terms of thinking about Palestinian leadership on the West Bank and Gaza?
Thank you so much, Amaney and Khalil and Salam. It's great to be with you despite the horrifying circumstances, some of which have just been emphasized by Salam and Khalil. So I raised, I know we communicated a bit before the panel, and I raised this question about Marwan Barghouti. And I think the kind of way I was thinking about some of the fantastic survey and polling data that Dr. Shikaki's center has been able to collect. I should note, we should all applaud them for being able to survey Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza right now, including numerous people who've been displaced, and that's really no small feat. But over the years, and I'm sure that Khalil can speak to this more, there have been questions about who Palestinians would support in a potential election for the next president of the PA. And one of the figures that that has consistently been included in those questions has been Marwan Barghouti, who is in currently Israeli prison and has been there for many years since the Second Intifada, is not, affiliated with the part of Fatah that is controlled and governed by Mahmoud Abbas, is not Hamas, but is seen as a figure that generally has broad popular appeal, comes from a modest background, from a small village in the West Bank, was a very vocal Palestinian leader during both intifadas, and then, of course, has had accusations of, involvement in some of the terror attacks of the Second Intifada, which he denied, but which ultimately led to his imprisonment. And the question about him, I think, is just, what does that represent that he seems to have continual strong support in these polls? Is it a yearning for more independent, Palestinian leadership that is not really seen as embedded within either of the kind of authoritarian parties that have been ruling in the West Bank and Gaza? Is it some kind of also perhaps inclination towards a figure that's not really also, seen as overtly Islamist, right? But is someone who can maybe bridge the gap between some of the more secular and Islamist leaning contingents of the Palestinian public. So, it was a question I raised for the panel. I'm happy to also hear other perspectives from my co-panelists on this, maybe particularly Khalil, who's been doing the polling.
Wonderful. So we'll come back to Marwan. There's going to transition over to Salam. Thank you so much, Diana, for that. I'm going to transition to Salam, and then I want to come back to your book, Diana, and ask you a question about governance in just a minute. But for Salam, so Salam, the discussion, at least in a lot of different corners in the U.S. and Europe right now, is that to talk about Palestinian reform, to talk about reforming the PA, and Khalil just told us 93% of Palestinians on the West Bank believe that Mahmoud Abbas should resign. Clearly, the PA is not going to self-reform. But to have this process of reform independent of the goal of a two-state solution is basically futile. That these two projects have to happen hand in hand simultaneously. Can you speak more to why that is in terms of just pure logic? What others will say, like, no. Once the Palestinians can show that they can govern themselves effectively, can show that they are democratic, can show that they can hold elections, and that Hamas is eradicated, then maybe we can talk about a two-state solution.
Yeah, maybe now, maybe later, if Khalil could shed some light, expand a little bit on what he said about Hamas's popularity and the paradox. On the one hand, their popularity declining by 10 percentage points in Gaza, and yet Palestinians in Gaza would want to see no one else other than Hamas govern Gaza post-war. How do they fare? How does Hamas fare in your recent survey in the West Bank? Or what you say about their popularity dipping applies to both West Bank and Gaza? If you want to answer now, but at some point it would be good to know that the answer to that. But to your question, yeah, some people actually link the fate of the PA and all PLO to what may happen on the political track, so-called peace process, whether or not there's going to be a path to a solution, whether it's going to be credible enough and all. That is true, but I think that probably resonated a lot more way back when some people still thought that was a possibility. People now really look at what is happening in the PA through another prism, and specifically on the issue of governance. And you raised the question about the revitalization of PA, reforming it. I mean, there's no question that the Palestinian Authority is in desperate need of reforming its ways. I mean, nobody would dispute that. That's been in evidence. And it surprises me, it's shocking that it's all of a sudden as if we were discovered on October 7th that the PA needed the reform and all of that. We Palestinians know that. And person on the street, average person on the street knows that very well. But that's really not the issue. A lot of people focus on the technocratic aspect or reform in a technical sense, capacity, fighting corruption, improving governance, and the rest of it. No questioning the importance of that on my part, but I do not believe that's really the issue. The issue is really more like the point that Khalil touched on, which is the point of entry of this new PA, whether it's to Gaza or entry into the West Bank, where its standing is very, very weak to begin with, for all kinds of reasons. We discussed a number of occasions before. So the issue for people to really, in order for them to really buy into any possibility about future political process and all, first, can we really put our own house in order in the sense of reuniting our politics? It seems to me there was an opportunity to do this. I hope there still is such an opportunity. But in the manner in which the Palestinian Authority responded to calls for reform, which actually, to be honest with you, trivializes the issue. I myself called early on, shortly after the war, for a reconfiguration, reconstitution of the PA in a political sense. What I really talked about was political enablement, not reform in a technocratic sense. U.S. administration jumped on it, but they said reformed and renewed, but then revitalized with a focus exclusively on getting the finances better, reforming governance, and all of that. Again, that's all important. And it's really up to the new government to really show that responsibility. The tougher question is, and it should not be that tough, would it not have been better, in fact, necessary for the Palestinian Authority at this juncture to really actually try to reconfigure itself have a government by consent of an expanded PLO that includes all factions, including Hamas and Jihad, from the very beginning. And for transitional period, then have elections. And Khalil pointed out this point. We talk about who might actually govern the people. Let's just really talk about elections. If elections are feasible, possible, in short order, fine, let's just do that. I personally doubt that that is really realistic. But rather than have a government that is not the product of consent, I think we should have done it the other way around. There should have been some consultation. Khalil was clear in terms of what his survey says about willingness of people to accept the PA. I'm not sure the PA itself would be really keen to go to Gaza in what would appear to be going to Gaza on the back of an Israeli tank, to be honest with you. So the only credible, honorable way to do this is to do this by consent. At that point, then people would be welcoming the PA, and Khalil's board would probably have shown different results at the point of entry to this. If we do that, the rest of it is, we're not in the 90s. This is a 3-decade-old Palestinian Authority. In the 90s, the Palestinian Authority relied a lot on international expertise for telling it what to do on finance and local government, elections, and what have you. This is a 30-year-old entity now. What needs to happen on the reform front is very well known. So to see internationals running around with ideas and matrices, with itemized lists of what the PA should do and engage in, that's the job of the government, and they're able to do this. The question is, they will to do it. We'll see if that is the case. But I would prioritize a lot more political enablement over reform in a technocratic sense. If you do that, then of course the question that you raise about where is that going to lead to? October 7 did not happen in vacuum. Decades upon decades of oppression, displacement, and all, highly capricious occupation regime. I need not really spend too much time on this. Everybody knows it. So settler violence in recent years and all the West Bank, shouldn't forget that. And extreme extremism on the Israeli side, and listen to what they really have to say. Well, clearly, the framework that has produced Palestinian Authority is no longer operative. People have to understand that. And if there's going to be a political process, a lot more needs to go into preparing for it by way of insisting, insofar as we are concerned, Palestinians, to have our rights, national rights as a people recognized before we really get into any serious negotiations about a state on the territory occupied in 1967 by Israel. It's eminently logical for us to really insist on not getting into that negotiation, into that process, before we get from Israel a formal recognition of our right to that state. Because a lot of what has happened in terms of the undoing of Oslo and why it really ended up veering, of course, relative to Palestinians' expectations. I'm not so sure it did veer too much, of course, relative to what others may have thought about, but it did not really produce the promise. Yeah. Good part of the reason why it was transactional, it did not start from a point of recognition of our rights as a people. That's important. If you do these things, then why not? Then I think we could really have a path toward a serious conversation about possibility of resolving this conflict. But if the idea is to hit the reset button on this and go through another round, I think people are way too skeptical. And it's not really only Hamas. It's not really only Hamas or those who do not agree with it or are not part of the PLO. A lot of people are highly skeptical within the PLO itself.
Yeah. Thank you, Salam. So Khalil, just extending the question to you, I guess 2 questions based on the polling in terms of the questions Salam asked you on support for Hamas on the West Bank right now. Can there be a national unity government that excludes Hamas and remain viable? And also bringing in the question of the 2-state solution, because we know that Hamas has benefited in terms of building its support on the back of the failures of Oslo and the fact that Oslo never delivered a 2-state solution. Can you speak to a future where we're not repeating the same mistakes?
Well, let me just follow up first, if you allow me, to what Salam said about revitalizing the Palestinian Authority. Just to put it clearly, what I said earlier and what we've just heard from Salam. How do you revitalize how can a Palestinian Authority revitalize itself if it does not have legitimacy? Revitalization, first and foremost, requires that you gain legitimacy. How can a body that lacks it regain it somehow without elections? How can a body, if the Palestinian Authority today has zero, literally zero accountability in its political system, how can you revitalize it without providing it with accountability? A revitalized authority would require separation of power. In any political system, if you do not have separation of power, you have zero accountability. Today, we have no separation of power. The legislature is, of course, dissolved. The government reports to the president rather than to the parliament. And we have a president who acts as a parliament and as a government and as a judiciary. The judiciary has never been as weak as it is today. We have no free press. We have no pluralistic civil society. How can this Palestinian Authority that is responsible for everything that I've just said revitalize itself? That is simply unrealistic and cannot be done without going to elections, but it also cannot be done by an agreement by the political parties. The Palestinian public does not trust the political parties. It wants consensus, and it wants that consensus to include Hamas. Anyone who thinks that there could be a government that could function in Gaza without Hamas's consent has absolutely no idea what they're talking about. Hamas has the capacity, even today, to fully control Gaza. At any minute, the Palestinian Authority will not be able to send a single policeman to Gaza unless Hamas approves it. The international community will not be able to send a policeman to Gaza without Hamas approving it. There is absolutely no way in which you can have a national unity government or have a government that controls Gaza without the consent of Hamas. It remains the main political and security force, despite everything that Israel has done to it, and despite everything that Israel will do to it in the weeks and months ahead. Now, the revitalization, however, does require, if we want forces that will eventually reach a peace agreement with Israel, we want to go to elections with a political program that is based on diplomacy and negotiations. And that can be done based on a two-state solution. But if the two-state solution is dead, because the other side believes the entire land between the river and the sea must remain under Jewish sovereignty, under the state of Israel. If that is the position of the current Israeli government, how on earth are we going to be able to go to the Palestinian public as secular nationalist forces that wants to negotiate peace and ask the Palestinian public to elect us? This is not realistic. There is no doubt that Hamas will say, Israel does not want peace. This is why we launched October the 7th. And those Palestinians who are selling you the dream of peace and two-state solution are living a dream that they are trying to sell you that is a delusion, because on the other side, we do not have a partner. Therefore, to be able to go to elections and give those who seek a future in which Israelis and Palestinians can live in peace and cooperation in the future, they must be able to present the Palestinian public with a plan that leads to peace, a two-state solution plan. Therefore, it's absolutely critical that these two issues of providing the Palestinian Authority with the legitimacy and credibility through elections and the revival of the peace process alongside the two-state solution must go hand in hand. We are not going to be able to reform the Palestinian Authority unless there is a vision for peace that we can present to the Palestinian public and that is convincing and will be seen as viable by the Palestinian public. So any discussion of reviving the Palestinian Authority that is divorced from putting in place a vision for a two-state solution that is viable and practical, with the full support of the international community and the major Arab countries, and with Israel conceding that that is, again, is not realistic. And there is no doubt that Hamas's narrative will continue to be the dominant narrative if the Palestinians, whose first and most vital goal is to end the Israeli occupation, does not believe for a second that ending the Israeli occupation can be done through diplomacy and negotiations. How are we going to sell them a two-state solution then? We have to convince them that the diplomacy and negotiations are viable. And right now, no one can convince them of that. So what are we leaving them with? Violence, armed struggle. The Palestinians want to end the Israeli occupation no matter what. And they will be willing to go back to violence if diplomacy is not offered to them as a viable option to use in order to reach their most vital goal of ending the Israeli occupation and building their own independent state.
Thank you so much, Khalil, for that. And Diana, is building on that. If we move to elections, if you think about the time horizons on elections, if you look at the West Bank right now, I mean, we have the Gaza situation is just horrible and a mess, quite honestly. The West Bank, we have this like revival of more or growth of settler violence, which has also contributed to the legitimization of the PA, along with everything that Salam and Khalil also said about not being held accountable. If the PA were to become more democratic, moving towards elections, do you feel that this would help solve some of this problem moving forward?
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts bubbling up from just listening to Khalil and Salam and their remarks. I should also say I'm approaching this as a foreign scholar, as a non-Palestinian on a panel with 3 esteemed Palestinian scholars. So, you know, please, I hope the audience hears a large dose of humility in my observations. But I think I'm a scholar of formal politics, formal political institutions. I've spent a lot of time sort of studying the PA and studying local governments and municipal governments and all of this.
And you've done magnificent research on the ground in the West Bank and Gaza. So we
Thank
don't
you.
want you to disparage your expertise, Diana. Yeah.
No, not at all. But just the distance here, right? Of thinking about Palestinian politics on the ground right now for someone sitting in New York. But I do think, as someone who has been very focused on formal political institutions, I wonder, we think about these institutions, we think about the prospects of broadening inclusion within the PLO, as Dr. Fayyad has suggested in numerous venues. We think about elections and the importance of elections. And of course, these are all, normatively good things that we support for these to be broadly representative institutions, for them to provide opportunities for Palestinian political participation. But formal politics, if we're only talking about elections and representation, but we're not talking about how these institutions can actually play a role in advancing Palestinian basic security, in advancing, existential survival right now, due to all those threats that you just mentioned, Amaney, not just settler violence that's been increasing over the past few years, but increasing direct Israeli incursions into Palestinian cities like Jenin and Nablus and Tulkarem, and all of this that's been building up in the West Bank over the years. If these institutions aren't advancing basic freedoms for Palestinians, basic rights, basic security, how far does representation get you, right? So even if we can imagine a PA that has, and I don't say this to diminish the importance of having an elected leadership. Obviously, that's preferable to having someone whose mandate, expired, a president whose mandate expired over, 18 years ago at this point. But then what, right? And so I think that when we think about formal politics and formal political institutions, because of a lot of this lack of trust, this complete lack of legitimacy of the PA, I mean, to keep it kind of in a context here that goes back before October 7th, and just in the West Bank, which is the region that I'm most familiar with and that I've been following the closest, there has been such a deterioration in Palestinian existential security over the past few years. You know, going back to 2021, 2022, where we saw, you know, the PA security forces themselves implicated in the murder of the activist Nizar Banat. We saw, you know, the PA losing control of major cities like Nablus, Jenin, etc., and completely deferring to the IDF, who's entering these places and launching shoulder-mounted missiles into homes to ostensibly deter terrorism in these cities. We've seen settler violence. We saw the, you know, just this time last year, the what were described as pogroms in Hawara, in towns in the West Bank, of settlers going through and torching residences and cars and all of that. So, you know, all of that should be part of this discussion, I think, of what these formal political institutions can achieve. And if you do have a newly elected, more inclusive, let's say, form of participation, what would it be in the capacity for a new Palestinian president, for a new, let's say, activated Palestinian Authority legislature to do to kind of achieve or redress or help Palestinians, you know, achieve some of these basic rights and goals?
Thank you, Diana. And that is a good segue into some of the questions we're getting in the chat. For our viewers, please, if you want to ask questions, please put them in the chat. I'm just going to try to create some of them. The question is, for better or worse, a lot of people are sort of placing a lot of blame on Mahmoud Abbas and saying that, well, if he resigns, everything will sort of, you know, the future will be bright and rosy. But what Diana's talking about is this deep entrenchment of a political situation that will always disfavor any government and will chip at the legitimacy of any government given the ongoing occupation. But even without the occupation for a moment, let's just say Mahmoud Abbas steps down today. All of the issues that were laid out today, whether it was the corruption and the centralization of authority and the lack of separation of powers, the lack of transparency and accountability, how will that be removed? How will that be solved and improved simply by removing Abbas? That's my first question. And second of all, something that we didn't talk about, but the PA still has, by and large, control over the security apparatus on the West Bank. And there's always the threat of introducing any new change to the status quo, meaning Mahmoud Abbas and the PA. You risk splintering your security forces. You risk basically losing that control over the state's centralized control over the mechanism of power and enforcement in Palestinian society, just to be a little bit more of a realist there for a moment. So you could remove Mahmoud Abbas and then the whole project might just topple down. Is this something we should be worried about? Salam or Khalil?
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll take that one. Look, I think part of the problem, and I believe we saw that in this most recent round of political conversation about revitalization, and I fully agree with what Khalil said about that. I myself, actually, he said political viability. I said political enablement is the same thing. I mean, I entirely agree that the whole thing about reforms can be a contrived conversation, if you will, and it goes without saying. But this really reminds me, and should bring into the discourse, the need to not ignore any factor. We have, over decades, actually, of this situation, tended to think in terms of if only such and such happened, or the solution lies in X or Y or Z, removal of someone coming new. As part of needless part of the conversation recently, politically, was like when people started talking about revitalization, and that's not my term, immediately started talking about like the president without authority and all of that sort of thing. Some actually were saying we need to change the basic law. There's a war going on. People are dying by the hundreds every day. So let's talk about the need to change the basic law. That actually shows a great deal of ignorance with respect to those who really were promoting this idea, as if this is the real time to do it. I think we have enough of a legal framework to go on, and it's not really time to do that. And the basic law is clear enough. I mean, like other constitutions around there, it's not perfect, but it's not the time. And what reminds me of to say this is actually what we said about what if President Abbas were to go from scene. Elections are the answer. I agree on the question of elections, but is it really realistic to expect us to be able to have elections now? So we clearly need to move from where we are to a point where we can have elections. But elections, as Diana pointed out, by themselves are not really going to be at the end of the conversation, because you have a conversation about institutional readiness, what these institutions are going to do, political processes, and what have you. And it is in this context that reforms, even if I just have enough to suggest to you and the audience that they are not the priority right now, they are not unimportant, because good part of why the PA lost credibility with the people is not only because Oslo process failed, it's because of poor governance. So yes, even if you cannot fix the political process, at a minimum, if you were to really reform your ways, if you really begin to govern as a government for the people, essentially, then a part of the political deficit, viability deficit, if you will, the PA has been suffering from, would be redressed. Not enough to really make it viable enough to engage in a political process, talk about the PLO now, on behalf of Palestinians with the Israel international community. But to be able to do something about this could create that kind of new dynamic that's necessary. So I said what I said about reform, that is not, they're not important, they're wrong point of entry. The right point of entry is to really ask what needs to happen about the PLO, what needs to happen to enable the Palestinian Authority to be able to stand on its feet politically, begin to have some standing, not only in Gaza, but in the West Bank as well. Minus that, and I entirely agree with what Khalil said, I mean, the idea that somebody is going to really be able to show up in Gaza and govern, assuming Hamas is not going to be there, they're out of their mind. I entirely agree with that 100%. And that is one sense in which I really meant this whole idea of allowing Israel to continue to prosecute this war as if eradicating Hamas and completely doing away with it is attainable. I mean, everything as Israel has talked about from the beginning of this war to this day ranged from the impossible to the highly unattainable. So they should be called on this. Enough already, and let the process really move forward. Let's really begin to, first of all, focus on ending the war. But then what is it that we do? I think it's important for us Palestinians to be able to suggest to our own people and to the world that the Palestinian Authority can actually is in a position to assume responsibility in Gaza. The key to this is political accommodation. In the absence of elections, political accommodation. Because minus that, I just don't see how any Palestinian government can govern Gaza without consent by Hamas. I mean, it's out of the question. Or the people, for that matter, in Gaza.
Thank you, Khalil, on that. And just turning to you, Khalil, really quickly, and this sort of also trying to merge in a couple of questions on the Arab Barometer and your own polling. One of the questions stipulates that the Arab Barometer shows that Palestinians don't support a two-state solution and believe they can obtain destruction of Israel within 25 years through violence. I'm the co-PI of the Arab Barometer. We don't have this in our data. I don't know, Khalil, if there's something in your data. What we know is up until October 7th, 80% of Palestinians in Gaza support a two-state solution living side by side with the state of Israel. So there is support for a two-state solution in our data where people believe a two-state solution is still possible. So Khalil, if you can speak to that point, but also another question, which I often hear, and it's also in our questions, which is both you and Salam, and I'm sure probably Diana will probably agree that all of you talked about the need of Hamas to be in a unity government because Hamas still has extensive legitimacy, perhaps mostly in Gaza. But if part of the U.S. policy right now is to weaken the Israeli right wing, even Senator Schumer calling for an election that will replace Benjamin Netanyahu, how might the Palestinians think about weakening Hamas or neutralizing the influence of Hamas in the political process? So Khalil, if you can sort of tackle those two, that would appreciate that.
Let me start with the two-state solution. The support for the two-state solution has changed over time. 30 years ago, support for the two-state solution among the Palestinians was close to 80%. 15 years ago, we still had 70% supporting a two-state solution. 10 years ago, we had 50%, and now we have 3 months ago, we had a 1/3 support. The survey we have just released actually showed significant rise in support for the two-state solution, mostly coming from the Gaza, actually almost entirely coming from the Gaza Strip. Now, why has support for the two-state solution been in decline since the 90s? The answer is not because the Palestinians don't want a sovereign and independent state. They still, when we ask them to identify their most vital goals, identify independence and sovereignty along the lines of 1967 with East Jerusalem as capital as the most important fundamental goal for the Palestinian people. So they are not saying no to a two-state solution. What they are indicating when they are no longer support it now is that they don't think it is feasible and that we should not be deluding ourselves anymore. The two-state solution is dead. We need to move forward, do something different, ask for something different, negotiate something different, like a one-state solution, for example, with equal rights, or some other solution. Why do I say that? Well, because all the surveys that we've done show a significant correlation between perception of feasibility, that it is feasible for the Palestinians to have an independent state along the lines of 1967 with East Jerusalem as capital. Is this feasible? Now, today, 60 to 70% of the Palestinians say no. It is no longer feasible. So if you no longer believe it is feasible, then the next thing you do the next morning is basically to renounce your support for the idea that you now think is no longer feasible. That is very natural, a human reaction. If we restore the feasibility and viability of the two-state solution, we immediately restore the support for the two-state solution. So the two-state solution, in my view, remains the most viable solution, if the most viable that is for us to be able to have public support for it, if we can convince the Palestinian public that indeed this is a practical solution and that their state can be along the lines of 67 and so on. Now, remind me again of what was the second part that
if the U.S. is calling, or at least Senator Schumer is calling for the replacement of Netanyahu by elections, why not talk about neutralizing Hamas or weakening Hamas?
Restore the two-state solution, and you essentially eradicate Hamas. You'd not eradicate it completely, but Hamas, as an Islamist political party, does have a base among the Palestinians. There are Palestinians who are religious and who are Islamists, and to them, with Hamas, they share a value system that is absolutely critical to them. In our society, 25 to 30% of the Palestinians fall in this category. 25 to 30%, therefore, of the entire Palestinian society will continue to vote for Hamas if the only criteria for voting is sharing its value system. The problem is, in the past and until today, when we ask in our surveys, we find a lot of Palestinians, other than those who share Hamas's values, supporting Hamas. There are those who think the Palestinian Authority is corrupt, but that Hamas is less corrupt. And so they say they support Hamas, even though they don't share its value system. They are not part of its base. There are those who think that Hamas knows how to deal with the Israelis because secular nationalists have failed to deliver peace, have failed to deliver governance, strong political institutions, a democracy, etc. Yes, Hamas might not be better, but Hamas can hurt the Israelis, inflict pain and suffering on the Israelis to convince them that the status quo is untenable. So that makes sense to a lot of people who do not share Hamas's values, but that means they will support it, perhaps even vote for it. How do you then eradicate? How do you reduce that? Not eradicate it. You can reduce that by providing the Palestinians with an alternative that is able to deliver end of occupation, an independent sovereign Palestinian state, good governance and democracy and accountability in the political system. Once you are, and of course, clean government, the issue of corruption has been detrimental to secular nationalists in Palestinian political and social life. And therefore, that is how you can significantly reduce the support for Hamas to its base, those who share its value system. That leaves you with 70 to 75% of the Palestinians who are secular nationalists and whom you can win in elections. And you can even perhaps win some of the Islamists as well if you are more effective in governance, in service delivery, more competent that is, and on top of that is able to deliver peace and security for the Palestinians.
Thank you so much, Khalil. And then turning over to you, Diana, just for like the last round of comments, trying to bring in a couple of questions. One issue is whether a future Palestinian state should be demilitarized. Would that help existing leaderships pull their people towards supporting a two-state solution? And on the point, you know, I often get caught in these conversations of, oh, it's such a disaster. Israelis don't want peace. Palestinians don't want peace. But Benjamin Netanyahu and his coalition have destroyed the peace process. Hamas has destroyed the peace process. There's no, you know, we're just stuck in this very bad sort of equilibrium. Can you speak a little bit more about the roles pragmatic leadership can play in moving this conflict off of this horrible stalemate moving forward?
I can try. I think on the first question about the demilitarization of a Palestinian state or the potential demilitarization, this has actually always been either implicitly or explicitly part of the position of the Israelis, for sure, and also the US when approaching these negotiations with both parties. And I would argue that, you know, if we're going to be talking about the structures of a state, you know, that needs to be clarified, because states generally have defensive capacity. They generally have some form of military. And it's something that's just been sort of implied, as I said, and sort of assumed that that's what at least for some kind of interim or transitional period, at least that's what a Palestinian state would look like, and that's the only way you can get Israel to agree to any kind of future Palestinian state. Now, you know, it was in the Clinton parameters. It was in all of these kind of proposals that were on the table that it would be demilitarized.
And those are the parameters that were agreed to in the Oslo Accords.
That was like the last, you know, push after Oslo to try to get, you know, a final status issue resolved, and then Camp David, and et cetera. But I think, you know, we also, with all of this discussion, like Israel has stated, this Israeli government has stated it has no interest in the two-state solution. It has no even interest in the Palestinian Authority maintaining any kind of governance role. So I think there is an elephant in the room here of, you know, there's the U.S. position, U.S. pushing for revitalization and pushing for reform. And then there's the Israeli position, which is basically we're going to maintain perpetual security control over these territories, including, you know, all of Gaza and all of the West Bank. And what does that mean for any kind of Palestinian institutions that we might try to, or that might emerge in the wake of the current war, and what Israel is basically going to permit to exist. And so your other question about leadership, I mean, I don't think a lot about leadership in my own work. I think more about sort of empirical realities on the ground as a way to push things forward and improving, you know, not just governance, which has been mentioned, and venues for political participation, but, you know, basic security, basic rights, and things of that nature. So to the extent that, you know, you find leaders on both sides that are interested in doing that for both Jewish Israelis and for Palestinians, then maybe that could play a role. But at this point in the Israeli political space, I don't think, I think actually in the panel that you had Monday, I was able to tune into Dalia Scheinland's remarks just at the very beginning. They're finding there's still a move to the right in the Israeli political space. They're abandoning Likud and they're kind of abandoning some of the parties with the current government, but there's really no appetite for, let's say, a more left-leaning Israeli leadership right now, as far as the Palestinian issue goes. And so, on the Palestinian side as well, I don't know that there's going to be someone that emerges that, is going to, via the structures of the PA, let's say, be able to advance some of those basic, freedoms and rights and security that I think then can lead to some kind of peace in the future. So, not to end on too pessimistic a note, but that would be my response.
Thank you, Diana. Okay, so we've hit time. I want to thank our viewers who stayed with us. There are many questions that weren't answered, so I apologize about that. And we will come back with another panel. I want to give each of the panelists 15 to 30 seconds just for final remarks, starting with Salam.
Thank you, Amaney. Actually, quick point about demilitarize, the concept of demilitarize. To the best of my knowledge, and I was not really personally involved in negotiations, but knowing about them, they never broke down over the concept of demilitarized Palestinian state. The issue here is really actually sovereignty, and the fact that, in my own humble opinion, the center of gravity of Israeli body politic never was accepting of the idea of a sovereign anything other than Israel over the territory between Mediterranean and River Jordan. That's the bottom line. If there is that recognition, I think we can begin to talk meaningfully about a process moving forward. But if we continue to go beating around the bush in the way that has been happening over the past years, I don't think it's realistic to expect the outcome to be much better. And I think there will be violence, even more so than what, these rounds will continue. This will not be the end of it, unfortunately.
Thanks, Salam. Khalil.
My message is for the U.S. administration. Unless the administration is really willing to endorse Palestinian elections in the very near future, and unless it is willing to use all its leverage, all it can, to press the Israelis to move forward towards a two-state solution, then if the administration is not ready to do that, then it should simply give up on this idea of a revitalized Palestinian Authority. That is not going to happen. Hamas will remain in control of Gaza. This war is essentially a killing machine that will continue to kill civilians in Gaza endlessly while seeking to eradicate Hamas. Eradicating Hamas begins with these two preconditions. That is, the state of Israel willing to concede a two-state solution and to begin to take steps in that direction, a Palestinian Authority that goes to elections and gain legitimacy. That is where you can have a way out of the current stalemate we're in. Any other alternative, any other thinking about revitalizing the Palestinian Authority without having these conditions is just a waste of effort and time.
Thank you, sir. Diana.
Yeah, we just need a lasting ceasefire so desperately right now. And I think that's somewhat echoing the direction of Khalil's message to the U.S. administration and to others who are worried about both Jewish Israelis being held hostage and who are worried about the literal famine that is potentially going to be unfolding soon in Gaza and the immense catastrophe that is scarring generations of people right now. And then we can talk about, what role the U.S. has or other outside actors have in Palestinian institution building. But first, we have to get to a ceasefire.
Thank you. And with that, this is where we end. Thank you so much. And hopefully next time we convene, we'll have a more positive outlook on what's to come. And till then, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Salam and Khalil and Diana, for all your wonderful and insightful comments today. I'm very grateful.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aman.